Sorry.
It's okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's energy talk dedicated to renewable energy developments in the Western Balkans. My name is Inessa Shahnazarova. I'm the co-founder and executive director at Investing Network, and we are delighted to be hosting this energy talk in partnership with C Energy News. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so that you know how to participate in today's energy talk. At any time during the session, you will be able to submit questions to today's speakers. To do so, please just go to Q&A at the bottom of the control panel and submit your questions. As time allows, our speakers will address as many questions as they can. You can also comment on the questions, you can even upvote them. So we really hope that the session is going to be very interactive and engaging. The event will be moderated by Claudia Patricolo from C Energy News. Thanks to Claudia and C Energy News for the cooperation. C Energy News is the English-speaking news portal entirely dedicated to energy and climate change related issues covering Central Europe and also Southeastern Europe. Also, thanks to all of our today's distinguished speakers, Andy Aranitasi, head of North Macedonia at EBRD, Petia Icheva, program officer, Southeast Europe at IRENA, and Zoran Obradovic, managing director at WPD Adria. Okay, thank you so much. And Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Inessa. Thank you for this introduction. Before starting with today's discussion, I would like to spend a few words about why we are talking about renewable energy in North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and why it is important to talk about this topic in the whole Western Balkan region. We all know that overall renewable energy sources will be the key to the global economic recovery. And we are already seeing, for example, new European Union funds going in this direction. We're seeing investments going in this direction as well. And we're also looking at technologies which are progressing pretty much everywhere. And we're also looking at prices, on the other hand, which are going down when it comes to renewables, of course. Then if we talk about energy prices, then there is a huge other story to open here. So the Western Balkans could actually help Europe to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And I now would like to share with you some estimations that were made by IRENA, saying that overall in the region, the renewables growth could go from 16%, which was in 2015, to 24% in 2030. Of course, this is a general and not a general number for a larger region, but then Petia will go a little more into details. So now today we're going to discuss in particular two countries, so North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The first country has a plan to reach 50% of renewables in electricity production, which is quite an ambitious plan if we think that the country still relies a lot on fossil fuels. And then we have Bosnia and Herzegovina, which starts, let's say, from a better position, meaning that it already has a huge installed renewable capacity, almost entirely thanks to hydropower. So without further ado, then I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, who is Mr. Andy Aranitasi, the head of North Macedonia at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, who will give us an overview of renewable energy in North Macedonia, and he will also focus on the legal and policy framework, national strategies, and the role of private investments. Andy, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Claudia, for giving me the floor, and thank you to yourself and Inessa for the invitation. I will go straight into North Macedonia. It's a very exciting country when it comes to, I think, the energy sector developments and the potential for transition. I will share my screen now for you to basically see. I have a short presentation prepared, and then I can address any questions. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. How about now?
Yes, now we can.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Technology, unfortunately, we're trying to get more and more used to it, but I think our children are better than us at this thing. So just to begin with the first slide that I have prepared, this is a quick snapshot of the Macedonian energy market at the end of 2020, because the 2021 data are not available yet. As you will see from this, very loosely defined, the renewables would account for more than 37% of the capacity, but only 29% of the total electricity generation. This is because, as we know, renewables at the moment still have a lower capacity factor than traditional thermal power plants, which are predominant in North Macedonia. I say loosely defined because the definition of renewables in the country includes the large hydro, which probably would not meet the EU definition of what renewables are. In fact, if we abstract ourselves from large hydro, North Macedonia had over 2,100 megawatt capacity installed as of the end of 2020, and the genuine renewable small hydro, wind, solar PV, biogas, biomass, etc., would be a little bit under 200 megawatts, so around 9 to 9.5% of the capacity. And on the right side, you can see essentially the electricity mix at the end of 2020. The right-hand column gives you the installed capacity, and the left-hand column actually gives you the generation. And it is fairly clear on the generation side that half of it is coming from coal and an extra 20% from gas. So hydro and renewables, as we mentioned, just a little under 30%. The state is a very dominant player in the market still. Over 80% of the total capacity and 3/4 of the generation comes from ESM, which is a state-owned GENCO. And another very important factor, which is very, very relevant today, is that North Macedonia cannot cover its electricity needs. In fact, in 2020, it imported more than 30%. Traditionally, in the past, has imported between 20 and 30% of its needs. And we expect the figure for 2021 to be substantially higher because the hydrology was low during 2021, which basically requires a lot of budgetary support. In fact, the Macedonian government between November and February has had to support the sector just for electricity imports with nearly 200 million euros, which, if you put it in the context of a 4 billion euro budget, is a substantial figure. This sector is unbundled. This was done, part of it was done with support from EBRD a long time ago in 2005. The generation is grouped under ESM, which is the Power Plants of North Macedonia. That's the acronym in the Macedonian language. The transmission is still state-owned. The transmission system operator is MEPSO. There is a market operator, MEMO, which is also state-owned. And as part of the unbundling back in 2004, 2005, we supported both the Macedonian government to achieve the unbundling and EVN, the Austrian utility, to privatize the distribution system. So they play the role of, they are the sole distribution system operator, and also they play the role of universal supplier. The wholesale and retail markets have been fully liberalized now, and there is a balancing market which is operational. As you can see, about 43% of the retail supply to active eligible customers, about 43% at the end of 2019. One other important development which we expect to come soon, and which will help essentially in the regional integration of the energy markets, is that we expect the Macedonian electricity market to couple with the Bulgarian Power Exchange IBEX fairly soon. Now, just a bit of history, because it's, as you saw, most of the capacities you saw in the previous slide is dominated by coal and hydro. Just a bit of history of why this is so. Essentially, almost all of the generation capacity in North Macedonia dates from former Yugoslav times. If we look at this chart, for example, here, we see that the generation capacity started in 1956, and most of it, about 3/4, was installed until 1991. And this was primarily hydro. And then in the late 70s and the early 80s, you see the addition of fossil fuels, which is essentially the thermal power plants at Oslo and at Bitola, which with a capacity of about 800 megawatt. Then from 1991 to until about 2011, you see almost nothing invested. There is a quick jump in 2011 because there was a cogeneration plant, which became operational in Skopje. And that is it until about 2017. So if you look at the average investment for the period from, let's say, from the dissolution of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia until about 2016, the addition has been about 14 megawatt per year, which is very low. And then in the last couple of years, you see a little jump here to about 60 megawatt a year, so 4.5 times as fast. And this is coming in mainly from small hydro and some renewables. Now, this is an indication that North Macedonia is essentially on the verge now to start ramping up the renewable generation capacity quite quickly, led by small hydros, but also with the big expectations on solar and wind, which are part of the Macedonian strategy and which we'll get to into later. Now, the intriguing part is why this type of situation. So substantial investments in during the former Yugoslav times, and then very little investments in the 25 years after that. This is for two reasons. One, because the investments in the energy sector, they take a while to develop. And I think, I'm sure Zoran can cover this when he gives us his presentation. But also because North Macedonia for a while did lack a necessary clear strategy to support renewables, and also the legal architecture that is required to support renewables as well. And because of this, it was simply not on the map of experienced renewable energy developers, and this is something that is now changing. So I will get into the next slide to explain this a little bit better. So looking at North Macedonia up to, let's say, 2016-17, when we see very little investment in the energy sector, there were a few key points in the energy sector framework, let's say. The energy law itself was focused mainly on the utilities and had very limited support for small renewables. So at that point, there was, I think, a little bit of support for something like 8 to 10 megawatt for solar, which is essentially nothing. The energy strategy of the country, that's another important point, was focused on essentially adding nuclear capacity, whereas renewables were viewed as the sort of like expensive novel technology. Not without some justification, because as we know, especially solar, which is now the cheapest form of generation, used to be quite expensive initially in the beginning of the last decade, and then it started drastically improving around 2015-16, when we started seeing the first, I think, bids globally below 6 US cents per kilowatt hour. And now we've gotten to the point where in countries like even neighboring Albania, the bids for solar capacity have come to 2.5 to 3 euro cents per kilowatt hour, which is really, really cheap. Finally, one thing that was, I think, fairly important as well is that the bylaws were not sufficiently developed to support development of renewables, especially on the wind side, even with the feed-in tariff available, because there was a feed-in tariff available for a certain quota of wind, about 140 megawatt, and even these have not developed very far. So at the end of the day, it was clear, and that North Macedonia was also failing to keep up with its obligations to transpose the third energy package into its legislation, which was what also the Energy Community Secretariat report highlighted in 2017. Big change from 2018 onwards. First, North Macedonia passed a new energy law, which was fully in line with the third energy package. Then in 2019, it developed and adopted a long-term energy strategy to 2040, and this had a very substantial focus on renewables. During the period from 2018 to 2020, the necessary bylaws to support renewable generation and address grid connection issues were passed. During this period, the country also organized tenders for 242 megawatt of solar, some small, some medium size. And this was all done, by the way, or most of it was done with support from EBRD. And also with support from EBRD, the country introduced for the first time a market-based support mechanism, which was for the solar, which was based on a feed-in premium, as opposed to the traditional feed-in tariff, where the revenues are fully guaranteed. Finally, because the ambition of the Macedonian government to decarbonize the sector is big, and it requires, let's say, bigger investments to catch up with this ambition. A strategic investors framework to support large-scale investments in renewables was also put in place, and I'm sure Zoran can talk about this more as well, because one of the bigger projects of WPD is exactly in North Macedonia and is under this framework. So in essence, over the last 3 to 4 years, North Macedonia has been catching up at a very impressive pace with the implementation of the third energy package. In fact, it is at the point where amongst the contracting parties, the implementation of the energy community acquis is North Macedonia is ranked second. The implementation in the electricity sector, it is actually ranked first. So the overall result of second amongst the contracting parties is because its gas sector is still to be unbundled, and it's something that should hopefully be achieved in the course of this year. Moving on to now the strategic documents of the Macedonian government and their ambition to decarbonize the sector and bring on more renewables. The first important document that I mentioned earlier is the energy strategy, which was adopted in December 2019 and has a horizon up to 2040. This has 3 different scenarios. One is where the fossil fuels, especially the coal, remain active until 2040. The second scenario is a medium-term one, which decarbonizes them sooner. And the third, and the very ambitious program, which is going to be very tough for the Macedonian government to achieve, was the green scenario, which was to essentially close the coal capacities by 2025. There is then a draft National Energy and Climate Plan with a forecast up to 2030 and outlook up to 2050, which was submitted to the Energy Community Secretariat. North Macedonia was the first country to do so in the Western Balkans. It has been going through public consultation, and there are a number of comments provided by the ECS, which are not yet addressed because there is a need for additional forecast for the ICT sector in order to complete it and then to adopt the NECP. But essentially, the NECP outlines the ambition of the Macedonian government to decarbonize the electricity sector substantially by 2030 latest. The NDCs have been submitted already on April 2021, and they are consistent with the ambition outlined in the draft NECP. And also the long-term strategy on climate action and long climate action have already been adopted. Now, in the table below, I have just given a very quick overview of where the existing EU ambition and the Green Deal ambition are, and how some of the strategic documents of North Macedonia compare to these ones. So as we can see, in terms of renewable share, in terms of basically GHG emission reduction, these are very much in line with the EU ambition. So North Macedonia is essentially trying as an EU candidate country to approach the EU targets as much as possible. A few more words on the National Energy and Climate Plan itself. It aims to achieve essentially an 82% net reduction in GHG emissions by 2030, compared to 1990, which is the baseline, and 90% by 2050. It envisions the decommissioning of all lignite-fired generation capacity by the end of 2030. Potentially, the Oslome plant, which is based on the western part of the country, will be decommissioned sooner. And it envisions, very importantly, an ambitious 2.2 gigawatt of renewable generation capacity to be added by 2040. 2/3 of this will be in solar and one-third in wind. It also foresees some gas generation capacity to be added. This would be both to enable the quicker decommissioning of the lignite plants, but also to ensure system security. So below, under the transformations, you will see the three, let's say, main targets that NECP tries to achieve. And on the right-hand side, I have just tried to represent in the graph the burgundy type of color line is the one that illustrates the ambition of GHG emission reduction of the Macedonian government. You see how sharply it goes down over the last few years in the period to 2030 to achieve an 82% GHG emission reduction. Now, in terms of the electricity sector itself, and this is now talking about the ambition of the Macedonian authorities, as highlighted earlier, about 50% of the generation traditionally has come from lignite, and we can see it in the burgundy color columns in the left-hand side of the slide here. And a chunk of it has also come from gas since 2011. The ambition of the Macedonian government now is, as we see, moving on from left to right, and I must say that this represents the green scenario of the energy strategy, which envisioned the closing of the decommissioning of the coal-fired capacities by the end of 2025. But the long-term ambition of the Macedonian government basically is that by 2040, to achieve a 90% balance of the electricity generation to come from either renewables, which is the green part of the column, or hydro, which is the blue part, the light blue part. And about 10% here is actually meant to be the gas that that is introduced to help the quicker decommissioning of the coal-fired capacities. There is also a further ambition here of the Macedonian authorities. As everybody is aware, at the moment they're working on a gas interconnection with Greece and strengthening their internal gas transmission network. And the authorities are fully committed to prepare both these projects on a hydrogen-ready basis. So as soon as hydrogen becomes commercially available, there will be a switch to this gas from gas to, to hydrogen. And it may be that by 2040, even this little 10% that is in here in dark blue, which is the gas contribution, might be contributed by green hydrogen, so be fully renewable. This is essentially a great ambition, and it will take a lot of effort to achieve it. But it's very good to see the authorities being so ambitious in this respect. Now, what it will take to achieve it, and in addition to the decarbonization of the sector, I think it will take three important elements that need to be addressed. One is the urban planning, which in North Macedonia is actually a complex process and needs to be simplified and sped up. This is because, as we know, especially for solar, the investments are very land intensive. So you require a large amount of land, and the Macedonian authorities have already hired a consulting company to help them address this issue, identify plots of land which then need to be prepared for large-scale solar investments. The second one is the process of permitting, construction permits, which also should be simplified and be quicker. And the third one is essentially the offtake side of the market. A lot of this new generation capacity that is to be added is envisioned to be added on a merchant basis, so sell to market. This is obviously more challenging to finance and also more challenging for developers, but it requires essentially that as long as the issues of permitting, urban planning, etc., are addressed, and as the legislation has improved, this is likely to attract renewable energy developers, larger developers with experience, who can actually make these schemes work, or who can make hybrid schemes with partial offtakes, arranged with traders, with industrial companies, etc., functional in order to support the rollout of renewables this quickly. Now, why is the energy sector beyond the fact that we need to decarbonize the economies? It's also because the energy sector can be a great contributor to the overall country's GDP. In North Macedonia, essentially, as you can see from this graph, the share of the energy sector in GDP has been dropping over the past 20 years, relatively speaking, because of faster growth in other sectors, However, the green scenario of the energy strategy forecasts cumulative investments of 17.5 billion euros by 2040, if this scenario is to be achieved. That basically means 900 million, maybe €1 billion per year in this period, which is almost 7% of the 2021 GDP, which is actually a very high figure. So this does illustrate the importance of the energy sector going forward for the country, and how investments in renewables especially can be a strong driver for GDP growth in the future. A little bit also about what EBRD has been doing in the country. Obviously, focus on energy is a strategic priority of EBRD in the country in the context of supporting the green economy transition. And it has three key objectives. One is to increase renewable capacity and diversify the energy mix and have more private sector participation. The second is to increase the energy and resource efficiency. And the third then is more related to environmental infrastructure improvements in water, wastewater, solid waste management, etc. As I mentioned earlier, we have helped basically the Macedonian authorities in the tenders for solar to date. So the first 62 megawatt for solar PV on state and private land were supported by EBRD, and this is the tender that also introduced the feed-in premium mechanism. It was also good to see that basically the Macedonian authorities then learned from this experience, and there was a follow-up tender of 80 megawatts based on similar principles by the Ministry of Economy. And then we supported 100 megawatt PV plant tender at the thermal power plant of Oslome on a PPP basis. 50 megawatt won by a Turkish investor, 50 megawatt by a Bulgarian investor, which highlights the, let's say, the cross-border nature of the interest between the Balkan countries, and which, combined with some of the solar PV investments that we have been supporting directly with ESM, the state Genco at Oslome, essentially replaces the capacity of the Oslome thermal power plant, which is, I think, a fairly important part of the just transition in the Western Balkans. On the policy side, we're helping the Macedonian authorities on the just transition diagnostic and action plan for the coal-dependent regions, and this is very much being prepared in the spirit of just transition territorial plans that are done in EU countries. We're supporting a PPP tender for gas distribution, which has major implications, especially on air pollution for the country. We have also been supporting the gas interconnections with Kosovo and Serbia for the preparation for these two under the Western Balkans Investment Fund. We are supporting a grid strengthening exercise in the southeastern part with MEPSA, the transmission company, which is very important because this is the area which has the highest renewable potential in the country. And finally, we have been supporting the authorities also with international standard best practice environmental and social impact assessment for the hydropower plant in Chebren, to be done also by ESM, the state Genco, which is going to have, I think, important implications both in terms of capacity addition for the country, but also in terms of ability to balance the system better and support the rollout of solar and wind. However, it is important at this stage, regardless of the support we give and regardless of the desire of the authorities, private sector investments are quite important. This is for a number of reasons. One, the government, which has been supporting, I think, the economy during the pandemic, has a limited, I think, fiscal capacity. You can see here the gross government debt figure as percent of GDP. However, the Macedonian government typically reports this, including also state enterprise debt, which is not guaranteed by them because it is assumed that they will support it anyway. And that will take the overall level of debt about 61-62% of GDP, which is above the Maastricht criteria, and which the government doesn't like to do. And government also has limited project development capacity. So this is where I think the role of the private sector is huge, and it's important for the private sector to lead the green transition, in particular the experienced developers which can bring large-scale renewable plants at affordable price for the country. This is where the strategic investor framework comes in order to streamline the development and construction of large projects. And as part of this strategic investor framework, we've seen two projects emerge over the last couple of years. One is from WPD, which is up to 415 megawatt wind power plant with potential capital expenditure of up to 500 million euros. Another one is from Aqua Energy on the solar side, up to 400 megawatt, 270 million capex. These two in total would make up for about 40% of the ambition of the Macedonian authorities in terms of renewable rollout by 2040. So these are two very important projects. With the tenders that we have supported on solar PV, this would go over 1 gigawatt, which would be half of the ambition already. And this is very important to realize all of these projects. As EBRD, we're very aligned with private sector investments in the renewable energy, and we feel that these are very important in supporting the country towards the green transition. But I will stop here, Claudio, because I spoke for, I think, a bit too long. And also, I think I'm sure Zoran can tell us more about the wind project and then their experience in North Macedonia. So I'll stop here and be ready to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Andy, for your overview. It was great to hear also that there are some big expectations from wind and solar. And yes, I'm sure that then we will talk a little bit more about that with Zoran later today. It was also interesting to see the difference between the old framework, the new framework. So it's nice to see that there are some improvements, and also the government is going towards the right direction for decarbonization. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but right now you actually mentioned several efforts that the government can make to achieve these huge ambitions. For example, you mentioned urban planning, permitting, the finance and develops for international markets. So I would like to ask you if you could give us a brief answer only on what's the prerequisite? What's the one thing that if we don't have that, we cannot move forward, and it's useless to talk about targets?
I think the ambition, the desire of the government is there. So I think the biggest prerequisite is to solve out these, let's say, two issues on the planning and permitting side. Because once you have those out, and once you have, the framework is in place. So it is now to make sure that the system functions properly and functions quicker. Once you have a working system that works well, it's just very well oiled, then considering the ambition of the government, it's fairly clear to me that the bigger investors will come. In order to achieve this ambition, you need investors who will add capacity in large numbers. So this cannot be achieved by adding smaller chunks, which local investors can do. So I think the one thing that we need is for those 2 or 3 key elements of the planning and permitting process to work well. The merchant side is also complicated, but I think that with desire from financiers and with experienced investors, this is easier to address. The planning and permitting is not something that the investors can do. It's something on the authority side. And I think that is the crucial part to unlocking the potential that the country has.
Thank you, Andy. We will come back to you later with more questions that I have and possibly also the audience has. So now I would like to move to Petja Icheva, who is the program officer for Southeast Europe at ARENA, and she will present the role of renewables overall in the Western Balkans. And then we will also go into details a little bit more with the North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, with a focus on infrastructure, grids, and the role also of regional cooperation. So Petja, over to you. I would like to ask, both you, Petja and Zoran, for later to show the presentation in a slideshow so that people can see it better. But for the audience, you will all get the presentations that we're displaying today. So you will have it in your computer. Petja.
Thank you, Claudia. I hope you can hear me and to see my presentation already in slideshow.
Yes, very well. Thank you.
So good morning, good afternoon to all the participants, and thank you for inviting us to present ARENA's view on the trends and developments in Southeastern Europe, and particularly in these two countries. I will start with very briefly with some global trends that actually will influence also the developments in Southeastern Europe and also in the two countries that we are talking about. These trends come from our flagship report, the so-called World Energy Transition Outlook, which outlines a pathway how to transform the global energy landscape aligned with the 1.5 degree goal for Paris Agreement. And it is clear that if we want to achieve our climate ambition by 2050, the energy sector will need to go through massive transformation in the coming decade, and especially by 2030, these years are years for action. We see three key, we identified 6 key avenues for emission reductions, where renewables, energy efficiency, and electrification will play a crucial role for emission reduction. And this means that further efforts are needed in all sectors, including power, transport, heating, and industry. And what's the situation in the region? I'll use our published in 2020 CESEC report to illustrate the trends of the region. Most probably our audience know, but just to remind that the CESEC region encompasses EU member states and non-EU countries from Southeastern Europe, and all Western Balkan countries are also members of CESEC. So all the conclusions or recommendations or findings from this reports are relevant also for the 2 countries that we are talking about today. In our report, we identified that for energy community contracting parties, actually 30% share of renewables by 2030 could be achieved cost effectively, and of course this number could further increase based on energy efficiency, additional energy efficiency measures, and also due to the technology developments and the reduction of the costs. This is also what our report also highlights, is that actually the main increase in the energy demand is coming from by 2030 compared to 2050 could come exactly from these countries if they implement their current plans for the energy sector. So there again here a lot of potential for energy efficiency and renewable deployment is there for the region. We see additional potential, untapped renewable potential in all countries from the region, including North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the higher ambition can be achieved with the decisive push for solar and wind technologies, which are now the cheapest form of electricity generation in most markets worldwide. Renewable power and electrification options to replace fossil fuels in the heating and transport sector would together account for about 2/3 of the additional potential identified in our study. And as Andy already mentioned, no matter of the choice of the technologies, in the next decade, all these countries, including North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, will need to scale up their investments and to modernize their energy systems. A profound transformation will be required over the next decade, as a large part of the existing fossil fuel-based power generation assets have reached or are close to reaching their end or operational life. Therefore, we think that with cost-effective investments in renewables, all these countries can build an energy system that is substantially less reliant on imported fossil fuels, and also to benefit from decreasing costs of renewables. And when we are talking about the costs, actually in the last decade, from 2010 to 2020, renewable power generation became the default economic choice for new capacity, with concentrating solar power, utility scale solar photovoltaic, onshore and offshore wind becoming competitive with the new capacity fired by fossil fuels. And these calculations are made without financial support. In most parts of the world, renewable energy is the least costly source of new electricity, And actually 62% of utility scale capacity added in 2020 costs less than the cheapest new coal power plant. On the left side of the slide, you can see the graph for the CESIC with renewable technologies with negative substitution costs. The colored areas below the horizontal axis, who actually will deliver savings. And the technologies above the axis are those that are that will result in additional costs. So most of the identified renewable options for the region deliver savings compared to the conventional technologies. And now, very briefly, which are the main drivers of the renewables deployment in the CESEC by 2030, including also these two countries. As I already mentioned, 2/3 of the potential could be deployed in renewable power and electrification of the end-use sectors, mainly transport and heating. And the region has vast untapped potential for solar PV and onshore wind, which are the two key technologies for the transformation of the power sector. Of course, only a fraction of the technical potential can be realistically deployed within the next decade. And these figures illustrate that resource availability won't be a limiting factor to accelerate the deployment of renewable technologies in the region. However, one common characteristic for the whole region is the fact that variable renewable energy introduction in the grid is in very early stage, and therefore the costs for this introduction are relatively higher than in markets with large share of renewables. At these mature markets, the technology cost declines and the ability of markets to exploit low-cost flexibility options is higher than in Southeastern Europe. Therefore, a system-wide view is required to capture the whole range of possible cost-effective solutions. And further investments in diversified portfolio of power system flexibility options, including flexible generation, demand response, storage and interconnection will result in important benefits in terms of system costs. Furthermore, integration costs could be greatly reduced with the adoption of best practices in system and market operation, which are adapted to the nature of the variable renewable technologies. And let me also, at the end, sum up our key recommendations from this CESEC report. As I said, these are recommendations relevant to the region, but also to North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina at national level. So renewables are ready to compete in the region, according to our estimations, but they need fair competition with fossil fuel energy technologies. There is need also to further efforts to reduce the perceived risk for investors, for example, by adopting best practices in policy and regulatory instruments, such as auctions, simplifying administrative procedures, also mentioned by Andy, and also by working with international partners and finance and insurance institutions to develop region-specific risk mitigation mechanisms. Also very important, cities will play crucial role in this decarbonization process and in the driving the transformation. Therefore, coordination of national energy planning with subnational entities such as states, provinces, and cities will accelerate the transition in areas such as electromobility and the adoption of distributed renewables or in the heating system of the country. Of course, regional cooperation across neighboring countries is also very important. Coordinated infrastructure investment planning and market integration will also be crucial for cost-effective decarbonization of national energy systems. And last but not least, actually very important point, stability, predictability, and long-term visibility of policies and regulations will be also key to give certainty to investors and to reduce the risk and the cost of the capital, and to ensure that the current progress is sustainable in the medium and long term. Particularly for Bosnia and Herzegovina and North Macedonia, according to our report, Bosnia and Herzegovina can achieve cost-effectively 56% share of renewables in its final energy consumption by 2030. And for North Macedonia, this share is 38%. On this slide and on the next slide, I try to give the picture how the renewable sector in both countries evolved in the last 5 years. As Andy already mentioned, both energy sectors are dominated by hydropower generation. There is some progress in solar in both countries. In North Macedonia, much bigger than in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in general, these developments are still very slow, and much more efforts are needed in the future. And finally, very briefly, what we are doing also with these two countries. In North Macedonia, last year, we published at the request of UNDP under their Climate Promise Initiative, a report which aimed to identify specific barriers and associated risks that hold back private investments in the renewable power, heating and cooling sector in North Macedonia. Based on this analysis, we provided short and medium to long-term recommendations for the government. Very briefly, in short term, we think that combined actions by the government and the development finance institutions would contribute to reduce the risk related to renewable energy investments. Among these actions are the creation of enabling environment, governmental guarantees for renewable projects, creation of dedicated renewable energy fund, which will facilitate the access to different forms of financing, development of risk mitigation instruments, and raising awareness about the renewable financing options. In midterm, we think that the focus should be shifted more to how to scale up renewable energy projects in order to achieve a large-scale investment. And we think that this could be achieved through standardized contracts, aggregation of projects, issuance of green bonds, and some changes in the financial sector regulation. Regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina, currently we are working with them on the so-called Renewable Readiness Assessment Report, which aims to assess the enabling framework for renewables in the country, and also to identify the main challenges and bottlenecks. And the report will give short to mid-term recommendations for improvement of the system. It's under development, so at this stage I cannot share a lot of insights from the report. Also, we are working with Bosnia and Herzegovina for alignment of the level of ambition between among some strategic documents that are under development or already developed in the country, and mainly the alignment of the level of ambition between their national climate and energy plan, and also the national determined contributions. And my last slide is related to the project facilitation assistance that we are able to provide here from as IRENA. Actually, in the last 2-3 years, we put a lot of efforts to develop this segment, and we created the so-called climate investment platform, in partnership with other donors and international organizations. And this platform aims to facilitate the development and scale-up of renewable technologies through tailored technical assistance to project proponents. So all the project proponents can register their projects on the platform, and then they're assessed and further, they're assessed by our experts, and some of them are we provide support for in order they to achieve feasibility readiness for financing matchmaking with registered financial institutions also that are registered on the platform. Also very soon, Irina will launch another platform that is more a financial tool, the so-called Energy Transition Accelerator Financing Platform, ETAF platform. It will provide not only technical, but as I said, also financial assistance for projects. I would highly encourage the participants today, the project proponents, to have a look at our webpage and the CIP and ETAF platforms, and to register and submit to us valuable project proposals that are from Southeastern Europe. Later on, in order to facilitate the matchmaking process and the identification of good projects, Irina plans to organize investments forum in different regions around the globe, including Southeastern Europe. Of course, for this to happen, we have to have appropriate circumstances for physical meetings and real networking. With this is actually the end of my presentations, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Petya, for your presentation. It is true that no matter what choice, what technology, is chosen, these countries have to scale up their investments in renewable energy. Before moving to Zoran, I would like to ask you something, because you mentioned very briefly this dedicated energy fund, which would be actually an interesting option also for investors in the region. And then, so what is that exactly? How does it work? And what's the difference with this energy transition accelerator platform? Because maybe the word accelerator reminds me of startups. So what's the difference between the two of them?
You mean between the climate investment platform and the ETAF platform?
I mean, the ETAF platform and the dedicated fund that you mentioned before, if so it's the same thing or not.
So maybe the dedicated fund is one of our recommendations for North Macedonia. And actually, we see that this is a good tool for offering a platform how to engage also with financial institutions that are there on the ground, and also to propose different options for lending and for example loans, grants, or different financial schemes that could be offered according to the needs to the project proponents. Our ETAF platform actually is a platform that is developed with it's another tool, and it's a platform that is developed with Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, and the aim of the platform is to mobilize around $1 billion US, and the Abu Dhabi Fund is participating with 400 million, which have to attract the rest of the financing. So the idea is this platform, this fund, to support not only technically but also financially projects around the globe, including Southeastern Europe. But as I said, this platform is still under development, so most probably in March it will be launched, and then there will be like tendering procedure where project proponents could apply for support.
And we look forward to that. So it's good to know that there are different kinds of financing in place. So thank you, Petya. We'll come back to you as well after the last presentation. So I would like to welcome now Zoran Obradovic, who is the Managing Director of WPD Adria, the Balkan-based subsidiary of German renewable energy company WPD. We already seen through other presentations and on this presentation that they are the owner of a very large portfolio in renewables in the region. And also, actually, Zoran, you have a little bit of pressure on you because they mentioned that WPD and ACU will create almost 40% of the target of the country. So how you plan to do that? I'd like to give the floor to you so that you can explain us what's your portfolio and what you're currently doing in these countries.
Thanks a lot. Also, thanks for the invitation to participate and to present today. It is a great pleasure to be with you, and of course, also to hear what the other participants had to say. Before I move on to the presentation, just to reflect, the pressure was created by ourselves. Actually, we wanted to use this approach of strategic investment, and then ACU followed us. Our colleagues and partners from ACU followed because we would like to get the pace up in North Macedonia. So I will show it in the presentation as basically a success story in the making, and then we will see what will be the actual outcome. Are we going to be able to get everything realized by 2027 to 2030 as we plan? So just if you can confirm that you can see the presentation.
Yeah, we see it very well. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. So before going forward, just to set up a context for the whole thing, other than the energy transition as a part of the global fight for climate change, that WPD definitely has in its core values as going towards decarbonization and really being an important player in many markets that we operate globally. In those terms, we also, I believe, should mention what was happening in the last practically 2 years since the pandemics, since we saw how the energy prices can be very volatile. So in regional energy markets, going down to as low as under 20 euros per megawatt hour on the regional markets, and then in 2021, which also followed already to 2022, going for hourly prices above 300 euros sometimes per megawatt hour, which was all-time high since these regional markets even operate. I guess that Andy knows very well how such fluctuations influence the bankability of the projects and the general trust of the banks, of the financial institutions towards project in that sector, which is a challenge on its own. And then also it is we can't be blind to what is happening in the world. From this morning we have another conflict in Europe, which is to be completely apolitical here and without taking any sides. This conflict will have further influence on the energy markets. It will have further influence on impact on how some of the potential technologies and some potential fuels for the interim energy transition period, which was mainly gas, will probably rise or be potentially compromised. This all tells us that there is a strategic need for the new renewable energy sources, energy facilitation development in these areas which benefit from natural resources, and that on top of the fight against global climate change, it is also a fight against energy poverty, and energy poverty in this technological age, which also enables all of us to be connected today, despite we are sitting all around the region, is something that we definitely need to be prepared. Maybe as a region, as a group of these West Balkan countries, together in Croatia, we should have been a little bit more proactive, but it is never too late as long as we have the resources and the possibility how to do it. So something about WPD. We are a company, as you said, based in Bremen, Germany, currently active in 28 countries. This list is also growing. We have more than 3,000 colleagues worldwide. In total, more than 5 gigawatts of renewable energy production capacity was installed so far. Currently, as you can see globally, WPD has this really impressive project pipeline of almost 30 gigawatts of new projects, and we are also quite active in this region. It all started very early for the renewable energy sector because WPD was established already with the headquarters in Dubrovnik in Croatia more than 20 years ago. This first development cycle brought to successful commissioning of 4 active wind parks of 92 megawatts of total installed capacity. The first one was introduced back in 2006. Already it is in its 4th year of market operation post feed-in. Interesting enough in this market PPA that it has in 2021, it was able to surpass the feed-in tariff level. So this also tells a lot about the market and about the possibilities for new projects and for securing financing based on market contracts instead of just relying on state aid and some kind of state support or subsidies that as a company we believe this time has gone, and we should enable the development of the open market. As for our second oldest wind park, Orlice, it just started its new PPA with from beginning of this year, and it was also the first PPA signed between 2 non-state actors. So we established a commercial relation with energy trader Danske Commodities here in Croatia. This also shows how the market in Croatia is slowly emerging, growing, and it is slowly coming to this state where the new projects could be developed exclusively on market basis. This is also the practice, and this is the know-how that we are trying to draw upon when talking about other projects in the region, and especially the 2 countries that we will be focusing on today, so Bosnia and North Macedonia. Our objectives are to continue with the participation in development, financing and construction, and of course operation on wind and solar projects, and also to be recognized by the local communities as the most favorable developer. Somehow along the way in these 20 years in this region and more than 2 decades globally, we really confirmed that having strong relations with the local communities where we are developing and operating projects are the key to success, and this is something that will be a part of our strategy wherever we are present. Currently, we have more than 1,500 megawatts in the pipeline in this region. I will tell you more details about it just a bit later. We want, as I said in the introduction, to promote sustainability and the protection of resources, wise use of resources, promote the climate protection, and also be very socially aware in the treatment of our environment. That's why we are trying to invest extra effort in meeting all the environmental standards, also with the development of our projects and their operation. We are aware that our technologies that we are using are probably the most neutral that exists currently with the least environmental impact and risk. However, we are still very cautious towards not jeopardizing anything in the environment that should be protected or just left alone. But I will tell you more also about the locations and how we chose them in the region when I come to the project part. We want to contribute to the increase of share of green energy, so everything that Andy and Petya were also presenting in this region. We definitely want to participate as a developer, but also as a socially responsible partner. I think that with our track record, we can have a voice which is worth listening to, and this is the approach that we took in all of these markets where we entered since 2018, so the WB6 countries, and this is what we are trying to do. But I will also tell you a little bit more, unlike Andy and Petya, who were maybe more optimistic and who saw a bright perspective for the sector. I will speak also a little bit more about potential obstacles and obstacles that we have faced already. And I remember that Andy asked the question, why do these projects last so long? Why does the development take so long? So I will reflect on that as well. As for our project pipeline in the region, in Croatia, we currently have around 500 megawatts of new projects in development. In Montenegro, we have one project of around 100 megawatts of installed capacity. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, as you can see, we have more than 1 gigawatt. So in projects which are in Herzegovina county, so the western part near the Croatian border, and also in the very south of Bosnia in Herzegovina county, near our headquarters here in Dubrovnik. In North Macedonia, we have the Veteran Park Virovi, our new flagship project, which was awarded the status of strategic investment by the North Macedonian government. It is a project of 414 megawatts, and for this project and for the way how things are going, we see. For this one, we really see a bright future, and we hope that we will be able to execute it, that we will have a framework which will enable us to execute it as planned, so reach the ready-to-build phase for the first phase already in approximately 3 years from now. We are also interested in engaging Serbia, Kosovo, and Albania. Currently, we didn't find suitable projects. As a developer, we are mostly interested in greenfield investments. Obviously, Serbia is out of its first development cycle and currently going into another one. Albania is in a tender, which is also in a way looking for some projects of maybe a little bit smaller size than what we would generally be interested in today, and we are expecting a similar tender to be introduced in Kosovo soon. I will also compliment EBRD. Really, what we can see and feel is that their presence and their participation in these processes is helping creating definitely better surroundings and better framework. In the end, the fine-tuning and also the trust within the investors will show how successful those initiatives will be. Now, to speak about Croatia first, before going to the examples of Bosnia and Herzegovina and North Macedonia. Our base is here, and we started with the activities first here, and we have ongoing projects here. So we are really deep in the topic in Croatia. I wanted to start with this benchmark also to show to all the participants and especially those focused only on maybe particular markets and not all of them not being regional as we are, that the grass in the neighbor's meadow is not always greener or nicer. As you can see here, when presenting the Croatian regulatory framework for renewable energy sources development, despite Croatia is EU member since 2013, and it could be expected that everything should work right, that according to acquis communautaire, according to everything being in line with European procedures, with the third energy package, that it should be possible, and not only possible, but promoted to develop new renewable energy sources capacities. As you can see from the legal changes which happened in 2016, this was practically impossible because bylaws in virtually all areas that Andy was talking about, from planning, permitting, grid access, everything was missing. From 2018, this was updated to a certain point, but it brought to new deadlock in the grid connection access because everyone could apply for everything, and the TSO, the transmission system operator, started to see that there are around more than 10 gigawatts of new projects in the grid. They always consider whoever applies after that 10 have already been constructed, despite they were just virtual. They were mostly just ideas who did the grid connection study, and by the TSO they were seen as already done. So it was almost impossible to conclude the grid connection agreement, which was always a condition for having the project permitted. Also in Croatia, since this period, we had a missing bylaw which would enable the access to the state land. It was supposed to be a tender for granting access to the state land. Why is state land important? This is true for most of the former Yugoslav republics because most of these really vast areas, especially for large utility size wind parks, are mostly on the ridges of the hills and mountains, and these locations are state owned. So in order to be able to construct them, to get them permitted, there is a need for getting the state land. Obviously, for 4 years already, there was no access to state land in Croatia, and because of that, new projects were blocked. In the end of last year, we finally got a new regulation, a new law on electricity market, which also does have some good things, including the introduction of new technologies, offshore wind energy storage technologies, possibilities for developing cross-border projects, which is very important for the market coupling. Colleagues before also mentioned how it should be a part of the energy transition of the region that we also support. However, this new legal framework in Croatia made a difference between the so-called old projects, or the projects which are already in development, and the new projects which are just about to start the development. Unfortunately, a lot of things which were done for the projects in development between 2016 or 2018 till today were not recognized, and because of that, a lot of these actually old projects will also fit in the new projects category. Just like before, there are no bylaws for the new projects yet. The government first announced that they will come in January. Obviously, we are on the end of February. We still didn't even see them for public debate. So there is still no way for new utility size projects in the renewable energy sector to be developed in Croatia. Despite many investors are optimistic, they are coming to the country. They see a lot of potential, but unfortunately, after these previous 5 years of deadlock, we are a little bit cautious with our optimism. As for the old projects, we see that there is a way how these could be developed, but what yet didn't happen is that energy permits were not yet published by the ministry. So this is also delayed. It was expected that it should be happening in February because the deadline for application expired in January of this year. It still didn't happen. And this is another thing where we see that unfortunately Croatia, which has, just like the other countries in the region, really a large potential for introducing new renewable energy projects, and most likely because of the whole market circumstances around us, for all of them to be without state aid, without some feed-ins, premiums, or even to be with some discounted prices, which would enable bankability for the developers, but a secure procurement of electricity on the long run for the government, for the state utility companies. We still don't have these energy permits, which would enable approximately, according to our estimates, some 1,500 megawatts of new projects in Croatia to be developed. So, as you can see, even the European Union membership and some advantage which Croatia got in the beginning with developing first approximately 800 megawatts of wind projects in the first cycle in the old feed-in tariff support scheme. It wasn't a guarantee that the country will continue in this way, and the deadlock is lasting for quite some time already. So now let me benchmark this with two countries which are a focus of today's webinar, Bosnia and Herzegovina and then North Macedonia. As for Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have quite a complicated structure in the country. Obviously, there is the state, the national level of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where utility size projects in the end come for the energy market participation permit. They also get from the national institutions the grid connection permit. However, the energy permit, environmental permit, and the construction permit are on the federal level, on the federal ministries level, and then concessions, land lease, and public authorities consent, which is very, very important for the permitting process on top of spatial planning, is on the cantonal level. And finally, there are also municipalities which own, because Bosnia is quite decentralized, unlike Croatia, the state-owned land is mostly municipal or cantonal. So in the end, there is also the land lease, which has to be done with the municipalities, and they also need to provide concession consents. While we are aware that decentralization is generally a good practice, I noticed that also Petja said in her presentation how it is important, and one of the Irina's practices is to try to coordinate national and these lower level of governments for conducting the energy transitions. This is something that we definitely see that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, obviously very small municipalities with very low population density and very weak economies, they usually also don't have the capacities to manage the activities for the utility size renewable energy projects. The same, I'm afraid, goes also for the cantons. As for the federal ministries, still the legislature is, especially in the environmental aspect, not in line with the European procedures. A lot of the measures are not requested yet that are necessary in the European Union. And of course, for projects of companies like WPDs, we always do everything regarding environmental impact assessment and do all the procedures which are then also part of the standards which are usually required by the international financing institutions. However, this creates a lot of gaps between the procedure that we should follow on the local level and how we should actually be developing the project. And again, to come back to another political reality in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a lot of political conflicts which are happening in between the levels. So, for example, municipality, canton federation, or federation and the national government, they bring to deadlocks the projects which are being realized as the projects are labeled as the projects of interests of one of these levels, and then the other levels are not proceeding in the most efficient way towards settling their part of the project. We see that energy sector should still, at least on a strategic level, be on a higher level of the government, which would have the capacity for it, and then of course with the involvement of all lower levels like the municipalities, cantons, and the federal level, they could all take part and in the end give consent to what is happening in their areas, and we could very well understand that, but it is quite challenging to be negotiating, for example, 30-year-long concessions for projects worth more than 1 billion euros with the cantonal government, or trying to get a land lease tender and participating in a transparent land lease tender in the municipality, which is then deciding on a project of such a scale directly and has such a tool in its hands.
Zoran,
yes?
I'm sorry
yes?
to interrupt you, but we are running a little bit late, and I would like to give also some time for questions from the audience. So if you can just hurry up a little bit and close your presentation.
No problem.
Thank you.
I will be quick. I'll just get back to the main stuff. Then in Macedonia, the country is simpler. We do have the 414 megawatt project Virovi. We were the first ones to be granted the strategic investment status. And why did we decide for this status? The reason was that actually we saw that there are also some gaps in legislature. There are some things we were afraid that things like what we see in Bosnia or what we see in Croatia could be happening to us. And we suggested to the government, who was really eager to promote the renewable energy sector development, to try to bypass potential deadlocks with the strategic investment. We are currently finishing the strategic investment agreement negotiations, which are going really great, and I can compliment the Macedonian government on their attitude towards such investments. We hear that from the other investors. That's why more and more of the investors are coming there. This was true for Mr. Zayev's government. It continued also now with Mr. Kovachevsky's government, and yeah, this is encouraging for us, and we hope that this strategic agreement will pave the way for all the other investments and also for the regulatory framework, so not to get into those deadlocks or gaps like we see in the other countries. The reasons why in the end we want to see more RES development in the region and why are we so active in it, well, in the end we see that there is also a lot of energy export potential. So instead of most of these countries being energy importers, we think that they could be energy independent and exporting energy. Again, to come back to the introduction, you can see why this is so important strategically in these days, and in the end it will enable a smooth transition from this dependency on coal towards the renewable cleaner energy. What are the obstacles? We mentioned, or I think that Andy and Petya also mentioned everything that I had here together with my introduction. I will just add in the end that planned economy relics, the monopoly of state utilities, and finally corruption, which is going through all the levels, is burdening this region. And the sooner that the region is able to get rid of such practices, the sooner it will be able to succeed and basically realize this vision of becoming an energy exporter and definitely not be dependent on imports of expensive energy. So that would be all from me. I hope that we'll still have some time for the questions and comments.
We do. Thank you, Zoran, for this. So let's move directly to the questions that are coming from our audience. The first of which is actually related to challenges, because the question is if there are any plans with Bosnia and Herzegovina government to ease existing current requirements, licenses needed to be allowed to install turbines in the country. So basically, we're talking about construction company license. If anybody wants to take that, maybe Petya would like to take that. You're muted. Okay, I can see. I can hear now.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that I can answer to this question at the moment.
If anybody wants to answer this question, I don't know, Andy, because from North Macedonia, you don't have. Maybe Zoran?
From our perspective as a developer, we in the end we always work with qualified local companies for a lot of aspects of construction. We also form our own WPD construction whenever we have a construction site, but then we procure all the services from licensed staff from the local community where it is applicable. We understand what is the question, and of course that sometimes when some company has more teams of qualified people which are working internationally, it would be easier if their qualifications would be recognized locally. However, we didn't see that also in Croatia, and we were constructing our projects and we had to rely on local qualified suppliers, and I think that we will have to follow similar practice in these other countries. Of course, that a common market in everything should be one of the European goals and objectives, but as a developer, we are also prepared to find a compromise because of how we are doing things and also with what is currently regulated in the country. In the end, around 30% of all the investments fall out on the go on domestic product, as we like to call it. So around 70% is the technology and what we procure from that we can't get locally, and out of the 30%, most are the works and qualified labor. But this is also a way of being socially responsible.
Thanks, Zoran. We have another question that's about subsidy opportunities for RES developers, and if you see anything in national schemes or support via grants or subsidy funding guarantees in any of the countries that we have discussed today.
I can tell you that for North Macedonia, there is no such plan. So at the moment, actually, as I mentioned in my presentation, one of the reasons to need very experienced investors, let's say like WPD, is that North Macedonia seems to favor a very market-based approach. Even the solars that have been tendered today, and there have all been auctions with our support from EBRD, they have been either feed-in premium, which is a premium over the market price, or outright market-based. So that seems to be the preferred approach. But Zoran, sorry, I think you're trying to say something.
Yeah, the same like you said already. So the similar goes for Bosnia and Herzegovina. I don't see that for utility size there will be some incentives like feed-in was before, and I also don't think that they should be necessary. There is always this gap between us as developers and the banks, and I think that this gap can be bridged with offering secure offtake of the energy, and this could also be the way through, for example, auction systems, that these countries could procure a lot of energy on a controllable level, because in the end it is much better to be buying energy for, I don't know, 55 euros per megawatt hour than for 200 or 300 as we see now in the markets.
And absolutely, if I can add, I agree with you. And the fact is that we already have evidence in the region that, for instance, solar energy can supply electricity as cheap as 20, 25, 30 euros per megawatt hour. So in market conditions, I think in the current market conditions, but even in historical prices, it will be difficult to justify subsidies for this type of investments. And for sure, it wouldn't be in keeping, I think, with the third energy package approach.
Thank you. So Andy basically has included some numbers and some targets in his presentation of North Macedonia that were highly appreciated. One member of the audience who is asking if there is anything comparable available for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Petya, I know that there are going to be some numbers and some more data in the upcoming presentation, of course, but is there something available now?
Well, the only available source that I can recommend is our statistical reports that are available on the webpage. Otherwise, as you said, in our upcoming renewable readiness assessment report, all these trends and the current situation in the renewable sector of Bosnia and Herzegovina will be well explained, and also the challenges and the bottlenecks, including some recommendations for improvement. But this will come hopefully mid this year, around May, June, probably will be ready to publish the report.
So we still have to wait a little bit for those numbers. Zoran, we have a question directly for you, is saying, where do you see next challenges in wind farm development and installation in Croatia, with a focus on change regulations, and how can it be managed?
Well, every step in utility side energy project is a challenge for itself. We see that whenever new legal framework is sets in place, then new challenges come up from the coordination with other relevant ministries. And we see that already from these laws and bylaws that I mentioned, even when they will be brought by the relevant Ministry of Economy, which covers energy, that there will be some challenges facing the cooperation and coordination with the other ministries, for example, again, with granting the access to the state land, what is agricultural, what is forestry, and so on. And there will also be, because some of things we see that the deadlines are maybe not aligned in between all the aspects of project development, so grid connection, environmental, and land lease towards permitting. We see that there could be some gaps in meeting some requirements while maintaining the deadlines of some other requirements. developments. The most important is that the government shows political will and actually opens up the development with finalizing, completing the regulatory framework, and then we'll see from there. It will never be easy, but this is, this is tough work anyway. So we will cope with that as long as there is a good political will.
Do we have time for one last question? Because we have the last question in the Q&A, which is about the intensive development of RES that will surely result in increase of balancing prices. So this can be mitigated by coupling renewables with storage capacities. Is there any idea for subsidizing storage capacities? Anybody that would like to take that?
I personally am not aware of any such ideas at the moment. I think it is possible that they may come, but at least in North Macedonia, it appears that given the way the energy strategy and the draft NECP have been conceived, this would be a combination of strengthening of the traditional grid in the areas with the highest renewable potential, and also the introduction of some gas capacity, which I think according to the latest EU taxonomy is also considered green, in order to help with the balancing of the system. Having said that, I know that privately some of the existing thermal power plants are also looking at what the opportunities are at this stage, given the available technology or the technology that's being developed, to convert the existing thermal power plant into storage capacities. But at the moment, what the energy strategy and NECP envisages combination of grid strengthening and some limited gas to help with the balancing. In the case of North Macedonia, there is also a fairly large project which has been around since 2007, 2008, which is the Chevron hydropower plant. This is upwards of 300 megawatt, and that would also have balancing capacity. So that would be another way to address that.
Okay, thank you, Andy, for that. I don't know if Zoran, you want to also comment on this, because you work exclusively with renewables. So, and a challenge of that is also the flexibility of the electricity system and the resilience of the electricity system.
Yeah, first of all, the whole region has quite a good transmission system already, which is not as it's not as lacking as sometimes it was presented by even the TSOs. As Andy said, there is a considerable reserve of power in the hydro and also potentially in the gas sector for balancing. And we can see that also the two main technologies for renewables, wind and solar, are balancing in this region themselves quite nicely in terms when we have a lot of wind and when we have a lot of sun. I would, in the end, suggest that the invisible hand of the market subsidizes the technologies for balancing and the models of balancing which will prevail, and that we don't choose now a new path of subsidizing a certain technology and then waiting to see how it will cope with the market challenges. I think that we are already mature enough, that the sector is mature enough that we can let it for the market.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you to all the speakers that joined us today and all the participants who have listened to this webinar this morning. We're going to the right direction as far as it seems. Some numbers are not in place yet. Some legal policies, some permitting policies are not in place yet, but these countries are working on that. So Inessa, I would like to give the word back to you so that you can close up this event.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Also, thanks a lot to all the speakers for very interesting, very informative presentations, and also for answering all the questions. And also thanks to all the participants. You will receive a follow-up email with today's presentations and also the recording of this session. And as you may know, this session was organized as a part of a larger live event, which is going to take place in June in Montenegro, and the event, which is called Energy Week Western Balkans, brings together authorities, local energy companies from all the Western Balkan countries, as well as international financial institutions, development financial institutions, private developers, and service providers, in order to discuss the opportunities this market presents, and also to foster deployment of renewable energy in the region, and why not attract foreign direct investment. Now, we would really be delighted to meet all of you live this summer in Montenegro. Please visit the website. If you have any questions, get back to us. We'll be really happy to assist you, answer your questions, and also to help you to register to the event. Thank you so much once again. Stay safe, and we'll see you hopefully live next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks.
so
Bye
much.
bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.